just more and more and more power is articulated on the stage here, and I think that's something that I'm really holding on to from that conversation, is this idea of bringing texture and nuance and complication to the idea of erasure. Our panelists brought us back to the idea of remembering the machinery, of thinking of different kinds of erasures that happen. And I think that's what excites me about being in this kind of space, is we're not having the easy conversations. We're not thinking in the binaries. We're thinking about the gray and the nuance and the texture and how even we ourselves can participate in our own erasure and often do so for very complicated reasons. So we're now about to have our second film, which is called Altered States Brandfort, and it's helmed by Yumna Martin and Lesedi Moutloatse of Story. This will be followed by a panel discussion on social work and resistance, focusing on Brandfort, which will be moderated by our ReaBua project manager and feminist writer, Gail Smith. And she'll be in conversation with Keitumetse Moutloatse and Sisonke Msimang, who will join us via video link. Thank you.
Zulu yemfihlakalo, Zulu yesimanga, ezalise umhlabane.
In May 1977, you are informed that you have been banished. You will make your home in the Orange Free State, in a tiny town called Brandfort. The house where you live in Brandfort is not even a metaphorical island. It is not on a large plot of land or on a farm so remote that it may as well be in the middle of an ocean. Instead, the small three-roomed house sits alongside a row of others that look exactly the same.
The special press, they brought it in Brandfort. They came with a big truck, and then they just dumped this woman. We knew nothing about that because there were no newspaper by then in Brandfort, unless you give somebody to bring you a newspaper from Bloemfontein. But the whites, they even tip their people who are working for them, their mates. Don't come near to that woman. It's very dangerous. Do not speak to that woman. It's a politique.
Your tiny house is in a township that local residents call Patagahle. It is one of almost 1,000 houses, little grayish-yellow boxes, one exactly like the other, all of them too small to hold the dreams of those inside them. On the walls of many of them, there are likely to be framed pictures with captions that say, "Black is beautiful," and framed photographs of loved ones and certificates and albums stuffed with memories.
I used to pass through Winnie's place getting to school. So you find that even if you don't greet Winnie, Winnie would greet you. She would stand in front of her house where she was dumped and say, "How do you leave people? Come here." And then you simply cannot run away when a person says, "Come here."
The restrictions of banishment mean you are not allowed to interact with people in groups. They are supposed to stay away, and only one person is allowed in the house with you at once. You never take it seriously.
The special branch, they were staying each and every night. Right up there is a hill, Bason Kop, right up there. They would stay there with their fruitkickers, looking at who is getting to Winnie's house and so on. No one should visit Winnie. She was not supposed to visit anyone. She was supposed to report at the police station at 6 o'clock every day, and she was not supposed to get to town. Hers was just restricted to be done in the house. Automatically, What they said you should not do, we would do it, as long as it is good for the blacks.
Well, I have lived most of my life alone. The best years of my life really have been those spent under burning orders. Exile here means virtually really being in prison at your own expense. And it is the extreme isolation that is very, very difficult. And of course, worst of all was being without my children and not having the opportunity to play the role of a parent, like all parents in democratic societies. Virtually both of us have really not had that opportunity to be parents to our children.
You are a woman who has learned to live without hope, a woman who has steeled herself against believing in the possibility of kindness, yet who simply can't help herself because hope is inherent in living. To give up on hope is to give up on possibility. And how can a freedom fighter lose hope?
So we used to have our meetings in church because we were now told we are no more supposed to get together. When he said, "No, Mafa, what are the women doing here?" Then I told him. Then he said, "No, I think you must open a creche." Sure. In a township, small township like this, no one has been trained to run a creche here. No, I'll make a plan. She was very active with. Don't think it's going to take a week or what. 1, 2, 3, that. When he said no, just choose any women. I am going to send them in Soweto to go and observe how creche is being practiced. So as to come and do, you must do something, no, you must do something. That church, they were having a hall, and that hall was having a kitchen with a stove and full equipment. So those women, they allowed us to practice the soup kitchen there. The house that was burnt down, Winnie was practicing the clinic there. The medicines were from Chopek, from Dr. Motlane. So then it was bombed. She intended to build a garage and a storeroom to store the milimi. So they bombed that. It was in the night. A special branch.
That is why even exile is so worthwhile, because I'm absolutely certain that we shall attain our liberation. And even being in exile really is a constant reminder of the sickness of our society, and that we are virtually in prison, even in our country. Those who are outside prison walls are simply in a bigger prison, because a black man is virtually a prisoner, and all those other fellow whites and other groups that are as oppressed as we are all really in prison, in a bigger apartheid prison.
In fact, she is a social worker by profession, and she practiced her social worker her profession in Brandfort freely, because the people of Brandfort would use Winnie. They used to call Winnie Mamani. If we are ill, even during the night, they would get to Mamani's place. Mamani. Mamani said, just get a driver. You take this woman or take this person to the doctor, free of charge. Each and everyone, if you are hungry, Winnie would give you food. You're getting cold, when you bring you a blanket, will solve your problem you are having for. So the people were so fond of Winnie.
How can you fight so hard for justice, an act that requires nothing but hope, while protecting your heart from the vagaries of hope? You understand intimately the pain at the center of this paradox. Hope will save your people, but if you have too much of it, hope will kill your soul.
This is the first graduation of Tusano Dikese. That is the name of Winnie Mandela's crèche. The first one she established in Brandfort, this one. This was a letter Winnie wrote in 1979, November, just wishing my family the best wishes because of giving her that shoulder to lean against during those times, the bad times. Then she was just encouraging me, saying that I was the first one to come nearer to her.
Good morning, everybody. I would just like to acknowledge Nora. Thank you so much. Would you like to take a stand up and just take off your mask so people can see you and we can give you a hand? And also, I'd like to call on the filmmakers, Yumna Martin and Lesedi Moutloatse of Story Oracle. Come up. Just come and take this bow, yeah. And our cinematographer for that film is actually the photographer here today. She's hiding behind her mask. Thanks, Mamnoor. Good morning, everybody. My name is Gail Smith, and this has been an incredible dream assignment. I have been obsessed with Winnie Mandela since forever, and it is one of the most rewarding obsessions because it brings you into contact with the most amazing women, because only the crazies and the fabulous people are really as obsessed with Winnie as I am. So I'm really, really delightful. Has Sisonke joined us? Is she online? Oh, great. Okay, so I have oh, there we go. My other panelist is over here. I have the wonderful, wonderful pleasure of moderating this discussion with Sisonke Msimang, who you heard on the actual film, and we also have Keitumetse Moutloatse. I'm mangling your surname. My apologies. And really, when we were discussing what we were going to do with the various panels, I had said to Lebo and Bongani that one of the things that people who want to undermine Winnie invariably say, oh, it was Brandfort that broke her. It was Brandfort that broke her. And in my research on Winnie, I had actually found that no, Winnie broke Brandfort. She broke Brandfort and she built Brandfort. And really what we wanted to do was to get from our filmmakers a sense of Winnie's transformatory power and the ways in which she profoundly transformed it. And my job here today is just to moderate, not to speak. But I think that I'd love to speak all the time. But I just want to get from you, hey, Sisonke from Australia, how you doing? Thank you for joining us. I'm so glad you're both here. But before we jump into it, I'm going to ask you briefly to just introduce yourselves, and then I'm going to ask you my first question. So I'll start with you, Keitumetse. Introduce yourself and tell us who you are.
Okay. It's still morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Keitumetse Moutloatse. I'm the chair and founder of Black Women Caucus, but today I wear my favorite hat, which is a social worker. I'm a feminist social worker. There is a lot of connection between the work I do in social justice and being a social worker, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Keitumetse. Sisonke?
Sisonke Msimang, and I'm a writer. Wrote The Resurrection of Winnie Mandela.
Thank you. Okay, so Sisonke, were you able to see the film? Did you see the film that we just showed?
I couldn't hear it now, but I saw it a few days ago.
Okay, so you've seen, so I just wanted to ask both of you if you could just give us very, very briefly your response, your emotional response, intellectual response to the film. I'm going to start with Keitumetse and then come to you, Sisonke, because you're in the film. Keitumetse, you've just seen it. How did that land for you as a social worker or as a person?
Very befitting. Lovely to see the relationship between social justice, resistance, and social work. I just want to echo your sentiments about how we assume Winnie broke during that period, but it was so beautiful to see how she used her profession, her professional skills, to also push a very radical agenda, you know. So it was well curated, a lovely story, very emotive, you know, very emotive.
Thanks. Sisonke?
It was beautiful. Lesedi got an email from me saying, Lesedi! Wow, just beautiful. Absolutely stunning. Thoughtful. You know, as someone who has written about Mam Winnie, I had not, I think, done enough justice to her role as a social worker. I think seeing just that 10 minutes really made me to reflect on the politics of being a social worker in a way that I hadn't before. So that relationship between very practical assistance, being able to solve problems that people need right here and now, and then to be able to link that to a broader political strategy. Like, this is the thing that she is doing in Brandfort, and she has free reign to do that in a way that I think she couldn't do in Soweto because she was linked to the hospital. And here she's linked to no one. She's linked to nothing. And so she does it in her own way, in a deeply political way, untethered from any institutional relationships. And I think that really hit me very powerfully in this film in a way that it hadn't hit me before.
Thank you. Yeah, when we were doing the program, you know, we really wanted to focus on social work and the fact that she used her social work in a very strategic and political way. Now, most people recognize Mandela's law profession as a tool to fight resistance, but when we speak about Winnie, so often the social work, and I always say that was a petri dish. They thought they were breaking and banishing the woman. They were sending her. Where else would a medical social worker thrive but a place like Brandfort? So, Keitumetse, just talk us through a little bit about the history of social work and the relevance of Winnie specifically as the first black medical social worker. And what was social work about essentially in the sort of political economy of apartheid?
Whew, okay, great stuff. So I think it's really important to understand how social work comes about, right, at a global level. So social work kind of rises in the European countries after huge industrialization. So we were dealing with a contradiction of increased productivity, but that was existing alongside increased poverty. And so there was a need for, you know, women particularly to kind of aid those who were really not matching up to the economic man. And so social work starts off as a charity-driven, activity, largely led by women. And then we see, as we move into the 1930s, where we see a formalizing and training of social work, right? But it's also during the 1930s where social work is introduced into South Africa, right? And when social work is introduced into South Africa, it's really meant to deal with this poor white community. Like, I mean, you have all this privilege in the world, and you guys are just not matching up, right? And at that time, social work is largely influenced and driven by colonialism and imperialism, right? And when we look at the genesis and the history of social work, we see that we move from now, professionalizing social work to a more administrative role. So we need to almost write down and document impact, right? And that is a big concern that we still are seeing in the social work profession. But what becomes extremely important is how Winnie disrupts, the notion of the administrator in social work. So she brings into the spotlight the need for us to look at the political economy, social justice, and healthcare, right? But I think it's also important for us to note that during apartheid, and depending on what class line you sat on and what racial group you belonged to, that influenced how you defined the problem. So we would see, the white social workers and how they defined the problem of the poor white person, was really conservative in comparison to a more radical agenda that black social workers pursued. And when we look at the life of Winnie specifically, many people, we need to understand how the healthcare comes in. So as a social worker, anyone who's ever studied social work will tell you there's nothing as boring as the reports that we need to write, right? And the fun part in social work is when we get into the communities and engage. And so, like you said, many people, when we look and we locate the genesis of Winnie's political activism, we almost partner her with Mandela, right? It's almost like Mandela came and just opened her windows of resistance, and there she was. But in fact, Winnie's political journey started in social work during her practicals, right? Specifically in Alexandra and Soweto, where she was really interested in the rate of infant mortality, right? It is at that point where she was able to make the relationship between the political economy under the apartheid regime, access to healthcare, and also the fact that black kids were generally dying. Right? But Winnie also used her opportunity when she had to go out, like anyone who's ever studied social work. She used that as an opportunity to go and conscientize, to build the understanding of what actually the problem was in the society. But we also know that, of course, like any powerhouse, we always want to nip it in the bud, right? When a woman, particularly a black woman, has that amount of power, we always want to nip it in the bud. But what Winnie does, and she reminds us as social practitioners, is that our job is far bigger than just handing out the food parcels and making sure people have eaten the door to door. But instead, at the heart of social work is to capacitate people. So I love when you spoke in the film to say that if you are to ever envision an alternative society, freedom, liberation, you must have hope. And Winnie thrived on hope. But I want to problematize something because
I'm going to give you 30 seconds to do that.
When we often think about Winnie, we think about her as the mother of the nation, right? And we also think about, and when we think about mothering and we come to social work, I often think that when we speak about social work as a mother's profession, it often depoliticizes the work that we do. So we automatically assume that women are just there we're just doing handouts. Like there's no critical thinking behind the work of social work and the skill set of social work. And so when we look at that and how Winnie was able to also, act against a narrative that was increasingly restrictive, but also kind of gave her her rise, is that we look now and say, when we speak about social work in the context of mothering, number one, in contemporary South Africa, we're depoliticizing, but we're also reinforcing a system that thrives on the othering of the care economy, right? Because social work forms part of the care economy, right? And this is why we see social workers in contemporary South Africa are still underpaid. We don't have any good resources because of the notion that we're just here to mother and there's no critical thinking behind it. So Winnie challenges us and says, it's not good enough to just write a report about how many families you've seen, about how many food parcels you've distributed. She's saying that in order for us to work towards an equitable and integrated society, we must be able to change and capacitate our people to do so effectively.
Whoa, thank you. Thank you. So, I thank you for bringing in the 1930s, because, of course, a lot of people don't know this, but Hendrik Verwoerd was not just the architect of apartheid. He was also the father of social work in South Africa. He was the chair of social work, the first chair of social work at Stellenbosch. So he was the father of social work. And he has an interesting parallel with Winnie in that Brandfort, his father was the NG Kerk Church there. So Verwoerd spent his formative years in Brandfort. So him and Winnie have this interesting narrative, right, around social work and sociology. But anyway, that's just an aside. I want to come to you, Sisonke. The panel is looking very much at banishment. And it's interesting that Winnie speaks about her banishment as exile. I want you to just, how does that resonate for you as somebody who grew up in exile and who's written very, very beautifully about the experience of exile? How does Winnie's description of herself as being exiled resonate and land for you? And how do you feel about her sort of turning that banishment on its head by saying, I was actually exiled inside of my own country? So how did Winnie also resonate for you as a young woman in exile, seeing her essentially from afar?
Yeah, look, I think she's absolutely right. Banishment was simply another form of exile. And of course, hers was far more cruel and harsh than anything that I ever had to endure. Part of the function of exile, of course, was to separate people from the society. And this is why Brandfort fails spectacularly with Winnie Mandela. That just was never going to happen. She wasn't going to allow that to happen. And yet, of course, she understands it as a political strategy that is seeking to, diminish people's access to her. So I think where Brandfort is interesting is that while the community she has left behind can't access her, there is a new community that remains to this day incredibly loyal to her that she's able to forge. And so she challenges all of these ideas about tribalism. She challenges all these ideas about, whose allegiance will be to whom. She forges that in Brandfort by shifting entirely this notion that she's banished. And that's partly what I wanted, that struck me when I went to Brandfort myself. It struck me how ridiculously stupid apartheid was, because these bureaucrats thought that having her living side by side in a community, somehow that people would stay away from her, or that they would stay, or that she would stay away from them. It kind of boggles the mind that they thought it might work. So yeah, for me, banishment was, I think Brandfort is a great example of her, in some ways, her invincibility, her to be seen on other people's terms. There was so much that was said in the last response that I wanted to speak to, but let me stop here and I'll let you guide us, Gail.
Right, go on. Okay, Keitumetse, let's talk a bit about banishment, because it was definitely a strategy of the state, both the colonial state and the apartheid state. Talk to us a bit about banishment of black women as a specific strategy and the impact on black communities as a consequence.
I mean, when we think about banishment, when I close my eyes, I think about somebody throwing me into a dark corner, right? But when we think about institutional banishment, right, and systematic banishment, we realize that black women are still pretty much banished, right? There is the othering from decision-making, from processes. Even in our resistance strategies during the apartheid era, we see that our strategies are brought into question, right? It almost feels like we can't be the custodians of freedom, right? Because ourselves, we are the face of non-freedom. And so when we think about banishment, I think it's very difficult for us to just reduce it to, instances like, the banishment of Winnie. But I think we also need to think about more of the structural banishment and how that also feeds into a larger inequality that we're still facing till today. But Winnie's case study becomes extremely important, right? And I'm going to come back to her role as a social worker, because there's something that I find very impressive, that she was deliberate about the principles of social work, right? And even in a supposed banishment, any social worker knows that you're on call 24/7. So even in the moments where she's castrated, where she is deemed, a no-go zone, she still remains truthful to the principles of capacitating communities, right? And I think that we should never take away from her. And history does a very good job. Let's be honest, guys, the patriarchal agenda was quite slick with that, right? And almost erasing her and her contributions. We know, just now reflecting on Brandfort and looking at the ECD sector, right? The ECD sector in South Africa as a whole, is screaming genocide. We're literally killing young kids, young babies in this country. And for us to see Winnie make that linkage between infant mortality, the need for ECDs, and also liberation and equality is really important. And so, yes, banishment still exists. To some extent, we are still banished. But I think we must also be able to draw inspiration from Winnie. And I just maybe want to squeeze this in and, as a heads up to Tekano. There is a particular, and I learned this in my final year in social work actually, there's a particular methodology we use called narrative therapy. And when we're sitting here and everybody's speaking, I'm realizing that narrative therapy is one of the most effective forms of therapeutic interventions. And at the heart of narrative therapy is to tell stories. Because the most abused, the most disenfranchised people in society, when you give them the opportunity to tell their story, they're able to locate the freedom in their story. So even somebody who's been, who's a victim of any kind of violence, whether physical, sexual, or institutional, allow them to tell their stories and you will be shocked at how you're able to capacitate them to be better.
Thank you. And that's really what we were trying to do with this program, was to give a new generation a chance to tell the stories that we've had a chance to tell. Sisonke, I just wanted to ask you, how, if anything, do you feel that you were transformed or changed by researching and writing about Winnie? I know that for me it's catalyzed quite a nervous breakdown, because after 3 years of non-stop and putting together in chronological order what was happening to her and realizing she was caught up in a matrix of simultaneously oppressive hierarchies all the time, and they were all violent. How were you, if any, transformed by the process of writing about Winnie, and what was something that you learned about yourself in that process?
Hard question. Look, I think that the process of writing about her helped me to understand a little bit better this whole connection between strength and resilience. So she was incredibly strong for a very long time, and she was able to withstand this level of brutality that many of us just cannot imagine, on her own in a prison cell, banished, the kind of mind games and sexual objectification that she was subjected to by the regime, which constantly insisted that she was having affairs with this person, affairs with that one, and then the tabloids. Like at every step, she is subjected to all of this brutal masculinity, and she is able to transform that into something that pushes her agenda further. So none of this stops her, and I was struck by it. I was intimidated by it. I felt often as an author, you think you live with this person in a sense, right? And I was like, this Gogo is serious. And so I found that writing about her in the given what I began to understand about the effect of that realization, I felt that I needed and owed her care, so that I had to write about her with an added measure of care, precisely to counter what had happened both in her life, but importantly in the archive. So because what remains in the archive is partly her voice and her own incredible intellect, and so we're like some of that footage in the film, but a lot of what remains about her in the archive are these terrible articles, this way of seeing her, these interviews, like all of this stuff about her that continues the brutalization. And so the kind of afterlife of that brutality hardens, right? It becomes this huge weight of nastiness and meanness. And it's very hard to see her outside of that, particularly for a generation, unlike us, that wasn't able to experience her directly. And so as a biographer, what you're always thinking about this, and you would know this, Gail, what you're always thinking about is, how will this endure? What will happen in a century? What will happen in 2 centuries? What will the story be? What is the narrative going to be about this person? And so I needed to think about her and respond to her and write her into a place that was very full of care and love, and to protect her privacy was utmost for me. So yeah, it changed me in the way that I thought about the craft and what it is that you're doing when you are a feminist biographer.
Okay. Yeah, one of the big spiritual obstacles for me in writing this book, I just couldn't move, because I realized I was jumping over Evelyn Mandela. And Evelyn Mandela's spirit said, oh, no, you're not going to jump me. You have to come back and you have to know who I was in order to understand the man she married. And the relationship between Evelyn and Winnie was always something for me that fascinated me. And so just to speak to the care and the love, I had to understand Evelyn before I could make progress in terms of my own research and writing on Winnie, to understand the man that Winnie then essentially inherits from this woman, you know. But Keitumetse, I wanted to come back to you and ask you, how, if anything, have you been transformed as a social worker by learning more? As we learn more and our history is unveiled, as you learn more about Winnie, how has it changed you? How has finding out more about her changed you and transformed your approach to social work?
I think I only learned about Winnie as a social worker in second year, and it made sense because I started my first year in Fees Must Fall. So I struggled. I really did, because I struggled with studying social work and being an activist, you know. And then she kind of gave me the rubber stamp to say, no, my child, continue, you know, because she also allowed me to think beyond this administrative rut that we're stuck in as a profession, to say that the real change requires us to move on all modes of intervention. So we're looking at the micro, the meso, the macro level. And in most cases, traditional social work is still very obsessed with the micro level, which is important. Yes, we need to do our casework, but there's something that's happening there, that upper structure that we're not dealing with, you know. And so Winnie was the affirmation that I needed, that it was okay to be angry, that it was okay to take risks. When I think about myself as a social worker today, I attribute my social work degree largely to the feminist movement in this country, because instead of completing my reports, I was on the streets zabalazaring, you know. It didn't always work in my favor. It didn't always work in my favor, but it was an important journey for me to go through, you know. And I think now, in retrospect, when I look, you know, at some point I hope to teach social work, but also to teach a social work that it's not so popular. The one that says we need to go after the big guns. We need to be able to tackle issues of inequality. We need to find the sources and not always address the consequence, you know, because if we are to really change society, it must start there. But also, I think what Winnie, which is quite interesting, so this year we're celebrating her 85th birthday, and what is, and while preparing for this, I thought about Winnie's social work, the care economy, and it was quite interesting when we look at the response to the pandemic, that the entire response has been solely dependent on the care economy, you know, globally. And so this also reaffirms the need for the care economy, like social workers, to really strengthen their interventions, to be able to drive a society that we want to see for all.
Thank you. Now we've got 5 minutes, so 5 minutes left, and what I want you to ask you in wrapping up, whose shoulders do you stand on?
Ooh.
And why? And then I'll ask Sisonke. Sisonke's going to get a head start. She can think about her answer while you answer Keitumetse. Whose shoulders do you stand on, and why do you stand on their shoulders?
Sure. I stand on so many women's shoulders, but I think it was so interesting. The relationship we have with domestic workers is an untold love story in the country, right? And it also is an expression of the kind of sacrifices they've had to make to nurture some foreign family. I think about my mother, I think about my grandmother.
What are their names?
Queen Keitumetse Moutloatse is my grandmother. Rowena Jane Kisintseng Chikwado is my mother. And often when I think about myself and all the many contradictions I hold and carry very proudly, by the way, I refer and I attribute it to these women in my life who have not always gotten it right, but they did their best. And I think that's really important, because part of writing history is to be able to deal with the complexities and the shortcomings of the women that we say multiplied, right? Because sometimes we multiply also with the toxic traits, And when we are multiplying, we must be able to say, hey, mara leadership, more lenkare, mama, that corner, I don't think it really worked, and maybe I need to let go of that aspect of you. But I think I sit here as a woman, as a girl who was raised by a lady who owned a tavern for 21 years. I grew up in the most volatile cities in Johannesburg, but I'm a social worker, still ready to feed and to work for my country and to labor for it. And Mom Winnie is just an affirmation. She just basically says, Mukelet Amaya, you can do it.
Sisonke. Sisonke, whose shoulders do you stand on?
I mean, first and foremost, my mother, Keitumetse Msimang. I stand on the shoulders, of course, of my own grandmother, Sisonke Msimang. There was a generation of women, my grandmother and her sisters, Bogogo, were called wild horses. That's what they called them, because they had children in any which way they felt like it. They had husbands, then they kipitad for a while, then they married somebody. They just did their thing in defiance of what people always say are the expectations of African women. A few weeks ago, Ola was doing this fantastic conversation, and she talked this idea that people often say, well, where are the feminists? Where are the African feminists? And they will say that to us as they speak to us, looking at us. This kind of erasure is so profound. And I think what we also do is we look backwards and we erase not just women, but we erase defiance. So the defiance is everywhere. There's evidence. These women who lived singular, spectacular, idiosyncratic lives and who did all kinds of stuff. And yet somehow when we remember them, we rub out those bits and they become Gogo who sat on the mattresses and were like this. And we know from the stories that remain of them that that's not what they were doing. That's not how they were living. That's not how these children, who we are, came about. So I stand on the shoulders of troublesome, misfit, women. But also I stand on the shoulders, it sounds backwards, I don't know how to describe it, but I stand on the shoulders of this generation of young women, the fallists, who really energize feminism and who have taken direct action when our generation, we fought, we've done some things, but I think we fell into a trap of bureaucracy. We believed that we could feminize the state. And these guys are another kind of inspiration to me. So I don't think that the thing of being a feminist is ever over. I think I stand on the shoulders of those who've come before. I very much stand on the shoulders of those who are standing right here alongside of us. And I learn so much from younger feminists. I am constantly in awe of their wisdom.
Thank you both. I mean, I could sit here and talk all day and hog the limelight, but I just want to thank you so much, both of you. I mean, I was raised 15 kilometers from Winnie Mandela, and one of the things that there are many things that attracted me to her, but the fact that she was a single mom of 2 kids like my mom. And I think when you grow up and you watch your mother walk alone without a man through patriarchy, when you see a woman move through patriarchy without a man by her side, you understand what patriarchy is in its most nuanced form. And that for me was always the hook. I would look at this lady on television who was a terrorist with her 2 little girls and think, but she's like Mommy Mark and me, And I think that it was the way in which she walked so fearlessly through patriarchy on her own with her 2 children, that as a young colored girl, I looked at this woman and I was just immediately fascinated by her. And I stand on my mother's shoulders, Shirley Elizabeth Smith. She was a formidable woman, and also she was a teacher. And through generations of teaching, the caring profession, not particularly political, but very, very, very insightful. So thank you so much, both of you, for being part of this. I mean, we could go on forever, but Trayvon's going to have my head. So I'm going to have to stop now. Sisonke, thank you. Keitumetse, thank you. Thank you.
I think we should what?